Hector was beside himself. Joe was freaking out. And here I was watching Officer Lasco chicken-scratch my answer into his notebook for the 10th time. "Can I ask you something?" I asked. "No," replied Officer Lasco without looking up. Aha. So this was a bad cop night. Chief Olaf didn't seem entirely sure how to handle my brother and me. He couldn't seem to decide whether we were friends or foes. Usually he leaned toward foes. "Do you have any clues?" I asked. Lasco looked up from his notebook and sighed. "Did she leave anything behind? Are you thinking the Piparato brothers are behind this, or someone new?" Just then the door to the small office we were borrowing opened, and in walked Chief Olaf, followed by Joe, who he'd been questioning. The chief's expression was pretty grim, as was Joe's. I had the feeling that Joe's answers had been about as helpful as mine.
"I think we can let these boys go home," Olaf said, nodding at Officer Lasco. "Unless you have anything new."
Lasco shrugged and shook his head. "Not really. They didn't hear anything, the music was too loud. They didn't see anything, the ride was too dark." Chief Olaf nodded, his lips pulled into a tight line.
"All right, then."
I stood up, looking at my brother. His face was pale, and he looked exhausted. I knew he had to be suffering right now. Even though he and Daisy had recently broken up, he'd decided the case was more important than getting the girl. I knew he really cared about her. "Chief?" I asked, trying to sound as respectful as possible. "Can you tell us anything? You know we were close to Daisy. We're really worried about her." Chief Olaf paused and looked me in the eye. I could tell that he knew there was much more I wasn't saying. He was well aware of the fact that Joe and I had helped the Bayport PD solve some pretty tricky cases in the past. He also knew that we'd gotten in trouble for our amateur sleuthing one too many times. So we'd worked out an agreement with the chief and our dad. If we followed some rules and checked in with the adults while doing our detective work, we could continue to investigate. I think that while Chief Olaf sometimes sees us as wannabe private eyes, he knows that we're kind of good at investigating. We kind of catch a lot of criminals. And I think the chief understands on some level that sleuthing is in our blood. Still watching me, he cleared his throat.
"Okay," he said quietly. "I'm sure you realize that this information is for your ears only, and not to be shared with anyone. I'm telling you this because I know you were close to the victim. Understand?"
I nodded, and Joe did too. "We understand," he said, an edge of desperation in his voice. Chief Olaf continued.
"We're working on the theory that this is a copycat crime."
Joe raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" he asked.
"Meaning that the Piparato brothers aren't behind this," the chief clarified. "They carried out the first two disappearances and the hoax, yes. But this appears to be more serious. The kidnapper is hitting closer to home, the park owner's own daughter. We think that someone saw the death ride hoax in the news and was inspired to try his or her own hand."
I nodded, thinking that over and struggling not to ask the obvious question, why? That was the first and hardest question in any investigation. Figure out why the criminal did it, and you often find the criminal. Why would anyone want to hurt Daisy? To send Hector a message? To get revenge on her or her family? Why? Joe wobbled on his feet, and Chief Olaf caught him roughly under the shoulder. "Sit down, son." He gestured for me to get up and pulled my chair over for my brother to sit in. Joe followed orders, still looking exhausted and stressed.
"You boys had better get home,"
the chief said again.
"Get some sleep. Are you okay to drive?"
He looked at me. "Sure," I said. I felt weary, but not sleepy. He nodded.
"Get going, then. We'll call you if we learn anything."
I stepped over to Joe and touched his shoulder. "You ready?"